Ever feel like you're stuck in your own head?
Yeah.
Just like replaying the same thoughts over and over again.
Yeah.
It's like that hamster on a wheel. You're going through the motions, but not really getting anywhere.
Oh, absolutely. I think we all experience those moments,
Yeah.
where our thoughts just kind of spiral out of control,
Yeah.
especially when we're like facing uncertainty or, challenging situations.
Yeah. And it can be really exhausting, can it? Like
Yeah.
it can really prevent us from taking action and living our lives to the fullest. So that's why today we're really going to deep dive into this whole world of overthinking.
Sounds good.
We're going to uncover, why our brains love to get stuck in these mental loops, and more importantly, how we can break free and kind of reclaim our peace of mind.
Absolutely. And, one of the key things to understand is that our brains are wired for survival, not necessarily like happiness, right?
Right.
So that they're constantly like scanning for threats, even when those threats are more imagined than real.
So it's like our brain is stuck in that fight or flight mode,
Yeah.
even when we're just trying to decide what we're going to have for dinner.
Exactly. And that fight or flight response is driven by a part of our brain called the amygdala. Think of it as your brain's rapid response team,
Oh.
jumping into action to protect you from danger. The problem is, in today's world, the amygdala can be a bit overzealous. It doesn't always, differentiate between a real threat, like a speeding car, and a perceived threat,
Right.
like a stressful work deadline.
That makes a lot of sense. So this overactive amygdala, it's sending out these anxiety signals, even when there's no real danger. But why do our minds cling to the negative stuff? Why can't we just brush it off and move on?
Well, that's where something called the negativity bias comes into play.
Okay.
It's this fascinating quirk of, human psychology, where our brains tend to give more weight to negative experiences than positive ones.
Oh, wow. So even if we have 9 good things happen and 1 bad thing, it's that one bad thing that really sticks with us.
Unfortunately, that's often the case, and there's actual research to back it up. Studies have shown that we need about 5 positive experiences to counteract the impact of just one negative one.
5 to 1.
It's like our brains have this internal scale that's perpetually tipped towards negativity.
Wow. No wonder it
Yeah.
feels like such an uphill battle sometimes.
Mhm.
So we've got this overactive alarm system in our brains, plus this negativity bias that makes us dwell on the bad stuff. Is there anything else contributing to this whole overthinking mess?
Well, sometimes overthinking can be a sneaky form of procrastination.
Yeah.
We tell ourselves we're just being thorough or prepared, but in reality, we're using overthinking as a way to avoid taking action.
So instead of facing our fears head on, we get stuck in this loop of what ifs and maybes as a way to delay the inevitable.
Precisely. And the longer we stay stuck in that cycle, the more overwhelming and paralyzing it becomes.
Right.
We end up feeling exhausted and discouraged, but we haven't actually made any progress toward addressing the issue at hand.
So how do we break free from this overthinking spiral? Because let's be honest, it's not exactly like a fun place to be.
Well, the good news is that there are practical strategies we can use to quiet the mental noise and regain control of our thoughts. It's about learning to recognize when we're falling into the overthinking trap and then having the tools to redirect our mental energy in a more productive direction.
Okay. That sounds promising.
Yeah.
I'm definitely ready to learn how to shut down those mental tabs and get my brain back on track. What's the first step?
One of the simplest yet most effective techniques is something called the 5-second rule. Essentially, it's about interrupting the overthinking spiral right as it's starting to gain momentum.
Interrupting the spiral. That sounds almost too simple. Does it really work that easily?
You'd be surprised how effective it can be. The idea is that by disrupting the thought pattern, you're essentially giving your brain a chance to reset and shift gears.
Okay, so how do we actually do that?
Whenever you find your thoughts racing, just do something physical to jolt your brain out of that repetitive loop. It could be as simple as snapping your fingers, clapping your hands, or even saying stop out loud. The key is to do something that breaks the pattern and brings you back to the present moment.
So we're talking about physically hitting the reset button on our brains.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued. What's the next step in our anti-overthinking toolkit?
Step 2 is all about learning to differentiate between useful thoughts and what I like to call mental graffiti.
Mental graffiti. I love that analogy. So how do we tell the difference between a thought that's actually helpful and one that's just cluttering up our mental space?
Think of it this way. A useful thought helps you solve a problem or move forward in some way.
Right.
It's constructive, solution-oriented, and ultimately leads to positive action. Mental graffiti, on the other hand, is just noise. It's those repetitive, unproductive thoughts that add nothing but anxiety and stress. They're like those random scribbles you see on a wall. They don't serve any real purpose, they just take up space.
That's a really helpful way to look at it. So we need to become like mental editors, actively deleting those useless thoughts and making space for the ones that actually matter.
Exactly. And the more you practice this, the better you'll become at recognizing and filtering out those mental scribbles before they have a chance to take root and cause you unnecessary stress.
Okay, so we've interrupted the spiral and started filtering out the mental graffiti. What's the next step?
The next step is a technique called the worry window. It's a structured approach to managing worry, and it's been shown to be incredibly effective in reducing anxiety.
Worry window. You've got my attention. Tell me more.
It's surprisingly simple. The idea is to schedule a specific time each day, maybe like 10 minutes,
Okay.
where you allow yourself to worry on purpose.
Okay.
Get a notebook or open a document on your computer and write down all your fears and anxieties, get them out of your head and onto paper. When the time is up, you close the notebook or save the document, symbolically containing those worries within that designated space.
I used to be terrible at letting worries consume my entire day. But ever since I started using something similar to the worry window technique, it's like I've given those anxieties a designated space. It's been a game changer.
Yeah.
Does research support the effectiveness of this technique?
There's research that suggests it does. A study from the University of Pennsylvania found that this containment technique can reduce anxiety by up to 30%.
That's impressive. So we've learned to interrupt the spiral, filter out mental graffiti, and contain our worries. What's the final step in this anti-overthinking framework?
The final step is all about challenging those fear-based what-if questions that fuel overthinking. It's about flipping the script and shifting from a place of fear and avoidance to a place of acceptance and action.
Okay, I'm all about flipping the script. How do we do that?
It's as simple as asking yourself, and then what? After every fear-based question.
So,
Instead of getting stuck on, what if I fail this presentation, you ask, and then what? Will I learn from it? Will I get another chance? Will life go on?
I'm starting to see how this all fits together. It's about taking that worst-case scenario and putting it into perspective.
Exactly. And by envisioning those potential outcomes, even the negative ones, you start to build resilience and realize that you can handle whatever comes your way. You're not letting fear paralyze you. You're taking control and choosing to move forward.
This four-step framework is incredibly powerful. We've learned to interrupt the spiral, filter out mental graffiti, contain our worries, and challenge fear-based what-if questions. I'm feeling empowered already. But what about the long game? How do we build long-term mental resilience against overthinking? Are there practices we can incorporate into our daily lives to make overthinking less of a recurring villain?
That's a great question, and it's precisely what we'll be exploring in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, can't wait. Let's continue this conversation and discover how to build those mental muscles to overcome overthinking for good. Welcome back to our deep dive into conquering overthinking. So we've uncovered some of the underlying causes of this all-too-common mental trap, from our brain's overactive alarm systems to the pesky negativity bias that kind of keeps us, fixated on the bad stuff.
Right. And we've also explored that powerful four-step framework to help you kind of break free from those overthinking spirals when they happen. But now let's shift our focus to the long game.
Yes, let's talk about how to build that mental resilience, so we're not constantly battling, those overthinking episodes.
Absolutely. It's like building any other muscle, right?
Yeah.
It takes consistent effort and the right kind of training.
So what are some of those mental workouts we can do to, strengthen our minds against overthinking?
One of the most effective strategies, and one that's surprisingly accessible, is what we call mindfulness leap.
Mindfulness lead. I love that name. It sounds like mindfulness without the intimidation factor.
Exactly. It's a bite-sized approach to mindfulness, perfect for, those who find the idea of traditional meditation a bit daunting.
Okay, I'm all for keeping things simple and actionable. How does it work?
It's remarkably straightforward. You just need to dedicate a couple of minutes each day to noticing your breath. Find a comfortable spot, close your eyes if you like, and simply pay attention to the sensation of your breath, as you inhale and exhale. And here's the key. As thoughts inevitably pop up, and they will, you simply observe them without judgment. Label them mentally, like planning, regretting, worrying, and so on. But try not to get caught up in those thoughts. Just acknowledge them and gently redirect your attention back to your breath.
So it's not about emptying our minds completely. It's more about learning to, observe those thoughts without letting them, drag us down the rabbit hole of overthinking.
Precisely. It's about creating that space between you and your thoughts so you're not automatically reacting to like every mental blip that appears on your radar.
That's a really powerful concept. It's like we're training our minds to be more like a calm observer rather than getting like swept away by every passing thought.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And the more you practice mindfulness, Lee, the easier it becomes to detach from those overthinking spirals
Mm.
and cultivate a sense of, inner peace.
Mindfulness sleep, definitely adding that to my mental workout routine. What other strategies can help us build that long-term resilience?
Another powerful tool is embracing the 80% rule. It's about shifting our focus from perfectionism to progress.
I see the value in that. But isn't there a risk of like sacrificing quality for speed? Wouldn't we be settling for mediocrity?
That's a common concern. But here's the thing. Perfectionism is often just another form of overthinking in disguise. We get so caught up in the details and striving for that, flawless outcome that we end up procrastinating or even abandoning projects altogether.
So instead of getting bogged down in the pursuit of perfection, we should aim for like good enough and actually get things done.
Exactly. The 80% rule is about recognizing that done is better than perfect, especially when perfectionism is just another form of overthinking that keeps us stuck. It's about giving yourself permission to like launch projects and emails or make decisions when they're about 80% there.
That's incredibly liberating.
Yeah.
It takes the pressure off and allows us to move forward with confidence, even if things aren't like absolutely perfect. Okay, 80% rule, you're officially part of my mental toolbox. What else can we do to like strengthen our minds against overthinking?
Setting decision deadlines. It's a simple yet effective way to train your brain to trust your intuition and avoid getting stuck in analysis paralysis.
Deadlines definitely have a way of like motivating action, but how do we apply that to decision making?
It's all about setting those boundaries and not letting decisions, drag on indefinitely.
Right.
For small decisions like what to eat for lunch or, which route to take to work, give yourself a very short deadline, maybe like 30 seconds. For bigger decisions, set a deadline of 24 hours or maybe a week, depending on the complexity.
That makes a lot of sense. By setting those time limits, we're kind of forcing ourselves to make a choice and move on, rather than, getting bogged down in endless deliberation.
Exactly. The more you practice making decisions within those time constraints, the better you'll become at trusting your gut and, moving forward with confidence, even if you don't have every single piece of information.
That's something I could definitely start implementing today. Decision deadlines, check. Any other like mental exercises we can add to our anti-overthinking arsenal?
One final exercise that might sound a bit intimidating at first, but it's actually a really powerful way to confront your fears head on and build resilience. We call it the worst case gym.
Worst case gym. Okay, that sounds a bit daunting, but also intriguing. Tell me more.
It's about taking your biggest fears and like putting them through a mental workout.
Okay.
Start by identifying your biggest fear related to, the situation that's causing you to overthink.
Right.
Write it down in as much detail as possible. Then ask yourself, if this worst case scenario actually happened, how would I survive?
Okay.
What resources do I have? Who could I turn to for support? What steps could I take to mitigate the damage?
That's really interesting. It's about shifting from fear and helplessness to resourcefulness and
You
agency.
got it. By playing out that worst case scenario and, coming up with a plan of action, you're essentially disarming that fear. You're realizing that even if the worst happens, you're not powerless.
Right.
You have options, you have resources, and you have the strength to overcome challenges.
So it's like we're doing a mental rehearsal for how to handle those difficult situations,
Mm,
which in turn helps us feel more prepared and less afraid, when those situations actually arise in real life.
precisely. And the more you practice this mental workout, the stronger and more resilient you become. You start to see those what if questions not as threats, but as opportunities to learn and grow.
Wow, this worst case gym exercise is a real game changer. It's like we're taking our fears to the gym and giving them a good workout, so they no longer have the power to hold us back.
That's a great analogy. And the beauty of it is you don't need any fancy equipment or gym membership. You can do this mental workout anytime, anywhere.
This has been such an insightful exploration of like how to build long-term resilience against overthinking. We've covered so much ground, from mindfulness elite to the 80% rule, decision deadlines, and even the worst case gym. I'm already feeling more equipped to, tackle those overthinking tendencies.
It's been a pleasure diving deep into this topic with you. And remember, the key to lasting change is consistency. The more you practice these strategies, the more natural they'll become and the less power overthinking will have over your life.
Absolutely. It's about building those mental muscles and developing, a new mindset, one that's grounded in awareness, acceptance, and action. But before we wrap up, we have one final and critical piece of the puzzle to explore.
Yes, we need to talk about the power of self-compassion in the journey of overcoming overthinking. It's one of the most important yet often overlooked aspects of this process.
Okay, let's dive into that. I have a feeling this is going to be really important. Welcome back to our deep dive into conquering overthinking. We've spent this episode exploring the science behind why our brains love to get stuck in those mental loops, and we've learned about some practical strategies to break free. We even talked about how to build some long-term resilience.
Right, exactly. We've covered a lot of ground. We talked about things like the 5-second rule, mindfulness slate, the 80% rule, decision deadlines, and even that empowering worst-case gym exercise. But as we wrap up, I think it's really important to touch on a crucial element that often gets overlooked in the quest to overcome overthinking.
Yeah, you're right. It's easy to get caught up in the techniques and the strategies without acknowledging the emotional side of things.
And that's where self-compassion comes in, right? It's about treating ourselves with the same kindness and understanding that we would offer to a good friend who's, struggling.
Yeah, that's such a powerful concept. But when you're stuck in that cycle of overthinking, it can be so easy to be like self-critical and judgmental.
Yeah.
You just start beating yourself up for not being able to just stop thinking.
It's incredibly common, right? We tend to be our own harshest critics, but that kind of negative self-talk just adds fuel to the fire of overthinking. It makes us feel worse,
Yeah.
which in turn makes it even harder to break free from those mental loops.
So how do we cultivate self-compassion,
Right.
especially when we're feeling like overwhelmed and stuck in our own heads?
Well, it starts with awareness, right? Noticing when you're being self-critical and then gently challenging those negative thoughts. So instead of saying something like, I'm so stupid for making that mistake, try saying, everyone makes mistakes. It's okay. I'll learn from this and do better next time.
It's like replacing that inner critic with an inner cheerleader, right?
Exactly.
Someone who's supportive and encouraging rather than being judgmental and harsh.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. And remember, self-compassion is not about letting yourself off the hook or making excuses. It's about acknowledging that you're human, you're going to make mistakes, and that's okay.
It's about giving yourself permission to be imperfect, to be a work in progress.
Exactly. And the more you practice self-compassion, the more you'll realize that it's not about weakness or self-indulgence. It's about strength and resilience. It's about creating a more supportive and nurturing inner environment where you can grow and thrive.
It's like we're creating this safe space within ourselves, right? Where we can like learn and experiment without fear of judgment or self-criticism.
Precisely. And from that place of self-compassion, it becomes much easier to implement all those other strategies we've discussed. You're no longer battling yourself, you're working with yourself.
That makes a lot of sense. This has been such an insightful and empowering deep dive into the world of overthinking. We explored the science, we uncovered practical strategies, and we even touched on the importance of self-compassion.
It's been a pleasure. And remember, listeners, you have the power to break free from the grip of overthinking and create a more peaceful and fulfilling mental landscape. It takes time, it takes effort, but it's absolutely possible.
You're not alone in this journey. And I love this quote. A bird sitting on a tree is never afraid the branch will break. Not because it trusts the branch, but because it trusts its wings. Trust your wings, listeners. You have the strength and resilience to navigate the challenges of life, even when those challenges are coming from within your own mind.
And one final reminder, take action. Pick one strategy that resonated with you today and commit to trying it out. Even small steps can make a big difference.
That's it for today's deep dive into conquering overthinking. We hope you found this exploration valuable and empowering. And remember, you are stronger than your thoughts. You have the power to create a more peaceful and fulfilling mental life.